Hill on January 3, 1977, and let me ask you your name.
My name is Esther Gillis.
And you still live in Highland Mill Village.
Yes.
At what address?
132 Fowler Close.
Okay, Esther, and how long did you work at Highland Cotton Mill?
Well, 43 years. I went there in 1927, and I worked for 3 years ago. Of course, I had a child.
When did you retire?
13th of November. What year was it?
This is 77. 76, it was 3 years ago. 73. Last November, 3 years ago. Okay. Let's see if that... All right, Esther, would you mind describing when you were born and your recollections of your early years? If you were raised in mill villages, where they were, that kind of thing.
Well, I was born March the 11th in 1907 in Cumberland County at a small cotton mill town, Hope Mills, North Carolina.
Okay.
And my mother and daddy worked in the mill, and there were 7 of us children. I had...
Well, you were not the oldest. You were in the middle.
No, I was in the middle. But my father was a weaver in the mill, and my mother was too. And
she worked in the weave room as well?
Yeah. And when I was 11 years old, we went to Greensboro, North Carolina. And they worked in Revolution Cotton Mill there.
That was one of the cone mills at that time?
Yeah.
Right.
And I didn't work but a short while in Revolution Mill.
How old were you when you started?
I think I must have been about 15 when I went to work, but I didn't work but just a short while. Till we moved down in Montgomery County to just a real small mill, and I worked there. But the most of my working has been at Highland Cotton Mill. I worked there 43 years.
Let's talk about the mill village you know best there in the Highland, as what it was like. Like who was employed at the mills? Was it generally the people who lived in the village? And talk to us about that. Tell us how it was.
Well, that's right. They had a policy at Greensboro, at the Revolution Mill, and it was pretty much a policy at Highland Cotton Mill, that if you lived on the village, that your family, as they got old enough to work, they went to work in the mill.
Okay.
And I know my brother was fired over at Revolution, and my dad moved from Greensboro because of that, because he wouldn't run the boy off from home. But in Greensboro, they had outdoor toilets, and the mill company had a man employed that he came and changed them cans in. But after we moved to High Point, they still had outdoor toilets, but it did have a flush tank, you know. And all the houses are just about alike. Most of them 3 rooms, some 4, and 1 or 2 or a few 5.
Did you ultimately purchase the house that you lived in?
Yes, in 1955, our company sold the houses, and I bought mine. And most of the people there bought them, and they've made a great many changes.
Okay, now, the people then were who were employed in the textile industry as you came up were a very local residents, almost without outsiders, you might say.
That's right.
And it was not like the steel industry or others you've read about where there were waves of immigrations and foreign people and all this kind of thing. They were the local people.
Local people.
The second thing was that what opportunity did you have in that setting then to ever encounter black people? How were they employed, and in what jobs, if at all, in those at that period in the cotton mills?
No, well, they had a few. They had a few women that did the scrubbing and took care of the toilets, and they had a few on the yard, but none in the mill.
Okay.
Till
you remember the employment, the changes in policy that took place in much later years as you got older?
yes.
Okay. Let me ask if you were to hear it said that that one of the explanations given by some of the companies for this policy was that they could not have brought in black people because of the attitude of the white workers on this. Would that be a fair statement, or do you think there was other things to account for?
Well, the attitude of the people, some of them, it did have something to do with it, but our company never did take them till the law was passed that they had to. And then some of our people, I don't know if they've told management or not, but they talked it in the mill that they didn't need to ask them to train a colored person, a black person. I trained many of them, and they wouldn't stay. The job was so hard till they'd just work a few weeks and then they'd leave. But now, the majority of them are colored people.
In Highland? In particular departments or all over the mill?
All over the mill.
Mm-hmm. And are they good workers from your experience?
Well, some of them got to be real good workers, and they were nice, real nice people. Of course, I must say this, I never have been prejudiced against the black. Some of our best friends that we had when I was a child were black people, and I never was, but some of them were hard to train, and some of them, it's just like everybody else. There are difference, you know, in them. But there are some real good workers there now.
What was life like in the hard times and the depressions living in the camps?
Well, they were hard times, but I must say I think people were happier then than they are now. The only way to get to town, which was 5 miles away, was to walk, because nobody over there, the superintendent lived on the village, and he's the only one that had a car at that time. And they were all dirt streets in our mill village, and just dirt yards, no grass nor nothing. But the people were more friendly then. They'd get together at somebody else's house and have fun, or the kids would all be playing together out in the street, you know. I think people were much more happier then than they are now.
What about health care? How have you encountered it? What experiences have you had, and what opinions do you have about medical care?
Well, not very much. I belong to health care, but
What do you mean by that? What do you mean you belong to?
Medicare.
All right, you're under Medicare.
Under
since
Medicare,
you're
but I
65.
never have had to use it, which I'm thankful for. But
Does that mean you don't have checkups with a doctor?
No,
Do you have a regular doctor, a family doctor?
no, I don't have
You
no
do not have.
doctor.
When did you ever have anyone you considered a family doctor?
Oh yes, when I had my children, that's about the only time I ever had a doctor's. Whenever I
How
had
many years has it been since you've had?
Well, my baby girl is 46 years old.
Okay. And you don't mind my asking you this? I'd like to establish, whether you do or don't have, a person you regard as a family doctor. Then if you were to become ill now, how would you go about it?
Well, I just don't know when they urged everybody to get them a doctor, and you couldn't go to the hospital and around if you didn't have one. A doctor had to admit you. I went to 3 different doctors and tried to ask them if they would be my doctor, and they asked me how long it had been since I'd been to a doctor, and if I'd ever had a complete physical, and whenever I answered the questions, no, I had not, and it had been 40 years since I'd had a doctor. They said, well, you don't need one. They just laughed at me. I guess they just didn't have room for me.
Okay, so you're saying you made an effort, as you read about or heard about, the idea that it would be a good idea to preserve your health to have a family doctor. You then made an effort to secure a family doctor, but you were unsuccessful with it.
Yes.
Is it your impression that it would be wise or helpful for people to have regular checkups and have a family doctor? Or do you have other opinions about what doctors can and can't do?
Well, I have very strong opinions about that. I know I have been sick many a time that my neighbors would go to the doctor for, but I look on them and it seems that money is a problem.
Tell me what you mean, why money's a problem.
Well, I think the doctors, most of them now, they want a patient that'll come every 2 or 3 months and pay money, where I couldn't afford it on Social Security.
Well, do you mind my asking, what do you live on? What income sources do you have? Do you get a pension after 43 years?
No. Mm-mm.
You spent 43 years of your life up to 1973 with Highland Cotton Mill.
Mm-hmm.
You got no pension.
No pension.
If an employee were to retire in 1977 with even 30 years service, would they get a pension?
Yes, if they are on. Now this year, they started one this year down there, but a lot of retired people had went back down there and worked their amount out, what the law allowed them.
Less than the Social Security dollar amount.
And they fixed it then, so if you wasn't on the payroll.
Yeah, but you're getting, I don't want to get mixed up in that. If you were full-time, if you had stayed on for 43 years and, say, retired later this year, would you have gotten a pension?
Oh, yes. I suppose so, if they had it.
Because they have a pension program in effect now. But you got into a situation where you stayed past 65 and you still retired after 43 years without getting any pension.
Mm-hmm. I was 46 whenever I retired.
66?
66.
Okay. 66 when you retired and got no pension after 43 years service. Okay. What is your impression about health care generally, observing your neighbors and so forth? Are people able to have access to medical care? Is there some reason they're unable to? Like you say, you don't have a pension. That means you're living on Social Security. Could you make it if you had to pay rent? if your house was not paid for? Perhaps it isn't. I don't know.
It is, but no. It'd be very hard to make it on what I draw, but you realize that a lot of people draw a whole lot less than I do.
Okay. Do you think, is it your picture that a lot of those people don't get good medical care because they don't have the money? Or what's your image of medical care?
Well, sure, it's because they don't have the money, because if I was sick a lot, I couldn't live off of what I do now.
Mm-hmm.
Because...
Well, even if you're under Medicare, you're going to have to buy all your own drugs. Medicare's going to buy none of the drugs. Are they going to pay the entire doctor bill as far as you understand? You've never had to use it, but are they going to?
No, they don't pay all the doctor bills.
Okay, you're going to pay a portion of that.
Portion of that.
If you're hospitalized,
they pay a certain
year,
amount of that.
You're going to have to pay the first $124 of that starting January 1 this year. Do you think these things keep people sometimes from getting medical care?
Yes.
In other words, they stay away from doctors and get more ill maybe because they're afraid they can't pay them, or what?
That's right.
Well, what do you think would be a solution to that? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I think that doctors are just charging too outrageous of prices, and hospitals too. Mm-hmm. That poor people can't afford to go.
You have not been to a doctor, but do you have a fear of the size of a doctor's bill if you went to him?
Yes, I do.
You have any idea of what it would be if you suppose you had to pay for a complete checkup?
Well, the only thing, I had a granddaughter that went to the hospital back last year, and for appendicitis operation, stayed 3 days, and her hospital bill was about $1,500. I never could pay that, and I have always had a horror of owing people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now we're back after another meal, I believe, Esther, and that gives you the strength to continue with this role.
All right, Preacher Mike.
Right.
Go.
What I wanted to ask you about, if you'd tell me more about the life of the people, of their lifestyle. I'd like to ask you, I used to remember in Highland how hard women worked all week. This was like 35, 40 years ago. And how remarkably clean their homes were and neat. Was that a common observation, or you could make about
Common,
the people?
do you mean most,
majority of the majority of the people?
Yeah.
Women worked that hard?
And the only recreation you had then was
Hold
going...
it, please. If you want to, Rob, if you want to later say that women nowadays don't keep a clean house, you save that.
I did. That's what I want to say.
Well, let me hear it loud on the record, and then I got it.
Loud and clear. You got it on?
Yeah.
Well, Mike, we clean house all Saturday mornings, and maybe all day. I did all my washing, all my ironing, 3 children, and Bill and myself. And then on Saturday night, we went to the Union Hall to a square dance.
Now you remember I was before I married, and afterwards that's where we came every Saturday night,
that's
right?
That's the only recreation.
That was the recreation.
And the men and the boys played baseball in the summertime. Wasn't no football.
Now, when we interviewed Willie, for instance, he pointed out that they didn't want to hire him at Highland, but a good ball player was very important in those days, and he got a job then at Highland because he was, very good infield.
I didn't know he played ball.
Oh, yeah. And I always knew his girls were awful good softball players, those were good daughters, but they played, remember, on those hosieries. But all the companies had teams, didn't they, in those days? So
most of them, yeah.
Yeah, most of them had. Let me ask, what about, they were getting ready for Sunday. They tended to dress their children and themselves neatly then, and most of them went to church, did they?
Yeah,
What were the main churches?
Well, the main ones then was Methodist and Baptist right there on the village.
And then what? A lot of people went to evangelical churches, like what, Holiness?
Well, they were right up the road from us, not very far in walking
Might
distance.
be what? Church of God's? Huh?
They were all Protestant churches.
Yeah. There was no Catholic churches,
No.
for instance. But these tended to be either established Methodist or Baptist, or more or less a little out of the village. You might be Church of God or Holiness or Hard Shell.
Well, we got a Church of God over there now, but back whenever I was young, it wasn't. But Pentecostal Holiness was right up the hill.
The Pentecostal. Well, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now what about
And be careful, that's rocky.
since you were not able to smoke when you were at work, what habits would people form? Were there any people that took drugs or alcohol to work that you were aware of in a cotton mill?
Drugs or no, I never heard of no drugs.
Then what
or
other
women.
habits might people have in view of the fact that you couldn't smoke in the mill at work?
Well, they fixed a place for the golfers to go out and smoke when they'd get their work done, their rounds made. But the women could not smoke at the mill at all. They used snuff.
Mm-hmm. They dipped snuff?
Yeah.
Let's take you worked in the spinning department. You'd generally say you had a lifelong adult habit of dipping snuff, and that would be
Yes.
true of the majority of women?
A lot of them did. Some of them didn't use anything.
Okay. How about men who tended to use anything? Would more of them chew tobacco? than-
Yeah, a lot of them chewed tobacco when they couldn't get outside.
Okay. I believe you said you never got a pension, but did the company give you anything as you left? Did they reward you in any
Oh
fashion?
yeah, yes.
what
They
way did
gave
they-
us. They had all of our pictures made, and gave us a gold watch and
You
a
still
supper.
wear that gold watch?
Yes, I sure do.
And it has your name on it?
Yeah,
So that on retirement they gave you a gold watch
yeah.
and a group picture of the people that retired with you?
Hmm.
Okay.
And a supper. You know, they had suppers.
And a supper, okay. All right, is there, would you mind, I was not around here in the 1950s, and you've never been to see the play that has been made in which you are portrayed by an actress because of your role as a witness in what's called I can't think of the name of the play, but it's the story a playwright at the university here did of the story of the Scales case, a young prominent member of a prominent Greensboro family. And he was, as a young man, he was a person whom you were acquainted with, and he came and lived with members of your family. Is that true?
He lived
Junior
with me,
Scales
some did.
lived some with you, some with your mother,
That's right.
some with your sister Phroney.
No, she
Or-
wasn't my sister.
okay, I beg your pardon. Who was, he stayed different lengths of time
Oh,
with different
yeah,
people.
but he-
Okay. Was this, he was getting an experience away from the wealthy home in which he'd been raised, or was he working at the time?
Yes, he was
was
working
working-
over at the silk mill.
At the silk mill, and boarding, in effect, on Highland Village,
Mill,
right?
yes.
The silk mill did not have a village of its own.
No.
Right. Okay. You became acquainted with Junior Scales at that point, and I assume it was immaterial to you. You had no prejudice against him because of the fact that he later became a public communist, so to speak, okay?
No, I
Okay.
did not have none because I knew him as he was.
Okay, and in some fashion then, you were the only working person. A lot of prominent people stepped forward in the 1950s to testify to his good character when he was being sent to jail and being tried. And as character witnesses, a lot of very prominent people who knew his family testified to his good character. But you were the only working person, I believe, and that's the way in which
far
you're
as I know.
displayed.
Now, buddy, it's coming right.
Now, you were at that time an employee of Highland Cotton Mill?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any fear at that time? Did you recognize that the times, these were the 1950s, that anyone connected with a communist or saying a good word for one, even saying that he had been a churchgoer or an honest person, might get in trouble? You knew that general was a problem, right?
Yes.
Did you have any personal fear, or did you simply overcome your fear and not care about it?
Well, I never have had no fear. I've always thought if you were honest and told the truth, wouldn't nothing happen to you. You'd be all right.
Yeah, you think that'll always work in life, or it worked for you
No,
anyway?
it don't always work.
You've known some of the good people to
Yeah.
die young, like Kennedy or Martin Luther
Yeah.
King, and some of the evil ones live on forever, huh?
Yeah.
So you know better than to believe it'll always work, right?
Yes, but the main thing is as long as you're right, you're right. And, you know,
Tell me what you remember telling. I know it's been 20 years ago.
well,
What did you step forward to say? As well as you remember what you told the court in the 1950s.
well, I was called to the stand, and this man, federal prosecutor, I guess he was, I don't know, asked me if I knew the Junior Scales, and I told him yes, I did. He wanted to know then how I knew him, and I told him I had always known of the family. When I was a child, I lived in Greensboro, and I'd always known of him. But I didn't know Junior's personally till he came to High Point in the 39s, I guess. And then he asked me if I didn't let my children go to the communist camp. And I said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, if you mean Camp Larry, I let my children go because there's no other camp for them. And I said the mill was out, and that was the only camp that they could go to, that I didn't have the money to send mine to a private camp or a Girl Scout camp. And I told him that that was what they were saying now, that it was a communist camp. That I had always heard of it as a workers' children's camp. And that was something I had heard in later years. And I said, there's nothing wrong with that boy. I said, he's never harmed nobody. And I said, I'd be very proud if he was my son.
Did you say whether you thought he was honest or truthful? Did they ask you things like that, or the question of his character actually?
Well, I don't know whether they asked me if I knew that he was honest, but I said I had always found him to be truthful and honest. And I knew from the time I knew him and the time I'd heard of the family years and years ago that he had always been a good boy.
Did they ask you any other hostile questions, that government prosecutor, like about your children in Camp Larry? Or
No, that doesn't.
they leave you alone pretty well, would you say?
Yes.
A little afraid of you, they might?
Well, they dismissed me for I don't know what, for what reason, but they did.
They dismissed you pretty quick?
Mm-hmm.
Did you listen to any other part of the trial after you left? Did you stay in the
Well,
courtroom?
one thing I might say, before I left the stand, that I told the prosecutor that they were just trying to fill people full of fear, and that I'd heard Roosevelt say many years ago that we had nothing to fear but fear itself.
Did they let you say that?
Oh, yeah.
Lawyers didn't debate about you getting off the subject, like in TV shows today.
Mm-mm.
You didn't weren't concerned about what the people in Highland Village would think about you?
No,
Did you
sir.
get in the newspapers, your name in the newspapers?
No, I didn't ever see it in the paper, but everybody over there knew him, and everybody knew me, and I knew they knew where I'd went that day when I went to court. But
You told the company you were going to court?
I don't know. I
Or
might
did
have
you
told
work
my
off,
boss,
were you
my
working another
foreman.
shift?
I was on first shift, second
So
shift.
you had to be off a shift to do that.
Yeah. And I stayed till the trial was over. There were other witnesses.
Mhm.
Um,
What else did you hear that day? Who else testified that you remember?
well,
Anything you recall?
Richardson's prior wife, Emily, Mrs. Emily Pryor, testified.
This was a relative of the congressman?
Mm-hmm.
His wife.
His wife. She had known the Scales boy all of his life. His
Yeah, she
family.
got out of bed with the flu and went up there.
His cousin.
And his aunt.
His Aunt Lucy was this? or
Well,
his
I
aunt?
don't remember what her name was, but his aunt. And his mother was there at the trial, but I don't believe that she testified, but he had a brother-in-law, I think.
Was that Victor
testified.
Bryant of Durham? Do you know?
He did.
Mhm.
I
Was
believe
a
it
brother-in-law a lawyer, do you remember? Was he?
I think so.
And a prominent trustee or something in the
Mhm.
university was a prominent.
And Junior's sister was there, but I can't remember
Yeah.
her getting on the stand. She might have.
Well, did you ever get bothered in any fashion after that?
No,
No one?
other than people would kid me about it. And,
Yeah.
But I
Well,
had
let
to-
me kid you about it a minute, can I?
Yeah, if you want to.
I didn't know something until we were out eating today. I always thought you did this because you were a principled woman, very highly motivated, and a patriot, you might say. And then, all of a sudden, at lunch today, I learned the real reason why you did this, Virginia. I want you to answer a question for me. Who bought you your first pair of nylon hose in this whole world? I know that
Junior
means
Scales.
that means a lot to a woman, doesn't it? Would you
Sure.
say that no woman in the world would fail to testify for a man that bought her first pair of nylon hose in the world?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that because you've got to like a person
I
too
know. Okay.
to do it.
The other thing we were having some fun talking about, and I learned a lot about, I knew you, and you were reminding me of Rose Dannenberg. I forgot all about her, you know, and her family in Durham.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize you'd been off on trips like that. You said you and Rose, and who else went off on that?
Virgie Lance.
Virgie Lance. Where'd you all go? To what city
We
that
went to
time?
New York.
To a good convention?
Yeah.
And did you get to visit around the city while you were there?
Well, a little bit. Of course, it was too fast for me. I didn't care to visit.
Did you ride the
now.
subway, or what did you do? while you
No,
were
I
there?
don't think we
Streetcars,
rode.
or-
We might have rode the.
You didn't
subway
go down
thing?
the stairs?
Yeah,
went
yeah,
down
we
the
rode
flight
that.
of stairs underground and rode the subway?
Yeah, to the convention.
It was pretty fast, was it?
Well, I don't know.
Where was the convention? In a big place? Was it impressive? Did you
Oh
have
yeah,
music,
there were
or
several
all
hundred
speaking?
people there.
Huh?
There were several hundred people there from all over everywhere.
Was it a peace meeting of something of that order that you all?
Yes.
Do you think Junius had an influence on a number of the people that he contacted in his life, probably, in terms of the things that they later did? They might have, without going in all the directions he went in, might have at least been influenced to be more open-minded about peace conventions or things like that.
Well, he might have to some, but there were some that was scared to death at him.
Mm-hmm. Especially, you don't mean when he was working in the silk mill and over there. You mean later when he became a real communist figure, they were scared to death of him. Is that what you're saying? Or are you
Well-
meaning this period in earlier? What do you
Well-
mean, who was scared to death of them and when?
My friends and neighbors.
Okay.
But Junius was always a loner, most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have many real close friends, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But
How about people of his own age? Was he a loner as well with some of them?
I think so.
He dealt more with older people?
Well, older people he seemed to care for him more. Remember how good he was to my mother, and she really thought a lot of him.
Was there anything else that you recall about the early days in the dirt roads, the outhouses, the dirt yards, the life in the mill village? For instance, what kinds of things you ate, anything you remember about, particularly about tough times or depression times?
Yes, I can remember many times going to the grocery store with $2 or $3 to feed a family of 5 for a whole week. And the most of the things that we got was a sack of flour and a piece of fat back meat and a 2-pound pack of lard and maybe 3 or 4 pounds of beans, different kinds, pinto beans especially. And a lot of times we grew our own potatoes, in the gardens. And
But you didn't have meat. You didn't get meat.
No. And we buy canned milk, and we had milk gravy and fat back meat and biscuits, hot biscuits for breakfast.
Yeah. That's hard to equal today, isn't it? It's when you didn't have the meat and the things to go with it, though, the times were rough, huh?
Well, I've been to the store many a time and get too much in my cart and had to take it back to the county, to the shelves, because I didn't have the money to pay for it. Many times. I don't know how we survived, because some of my children were real rough on shoes, and by the time you kept their feet off the ground, there wasn't very much left. And they wore a lot of hand-me-downs from other people, coats and things that, and I made a lot of their clothes. And times were hard then, they really were, but people loved one another more, and they were closer together, and they always had time to stop and chat or visit. Well, I don't find that time now.
What impressions do you have of young people, any kind of impressions of young people in cotton mills or textile industry, hosiery industry today? What makes them tick? Anything different than would make a young student tick? Or what are they all about? Do they have a sense of themselves? Or are they just part of a generation raised on TV and almost indistinguishable from people who go on to school?
Well, I think TV's had a lot to do with it. You see, back then we didn't even have radios. Or I didn't. Some people may have had them. And our children would come in from school, they'd sit down and get their lessons. Then we had night work to do. We had coal to get in, wood to get in, ashes to take out. And by the time we got that done, it was about bedtime, And as I remember, only in the summertime, there's no recreation for no young people. None for older people, other than after the 40s. In the 40s, we had a union hall that had a dance, and we'd all get our works done. There's no rugs on no floors over there, none that I knew of. Some had plain floors, and some had rugs, Congolian rugs on the floor. And we'd scrub and clean them up and get all our washing done, our ironing done, and Saturday night we went to Union Hall to a square dance. That's the only recreation we had. And we walked up there and walked back. And I remember a whole gang of us had walked back, and we had a lot of fun coming back home.
Can you remember Nan Utley's daddy doing that square dance calling?
Yes.
Where is old Mr. Utley?
He's dead, and she is too. Nan's still in high form.
The media square with that old man.
Yeah, he was a main caller, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I don't know who else called, but I remember Nan Utley's daddy.
Than anybody else.
Yeah.
'Cause he called them.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's passed on now. And, but there were a lot of people from other towns, Greensboro and Winston
That's
and
right.
Thomasville come
It
up
was
there.
the most popular square dance, anywhere around.
It was free. It didn't cost nothing. You didn't have to pay a penny to go.
Wonder how the union supported it. Do you all remember? Whether the
Well, the union paid the rent on the hall.
And then were the musicians all just volunteers?
Yes.
And then Mr. Utley called it
Just for
so
the
that
fun.
nobody. It was all just done to keep the young people and the others
That's
busy.
right.
I think that's what I remember. We had no money at all, but we could go.
That's right.
That's more recreation than a lot of communities have to this day.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You think about young people, if they haven't got money in their pocket, they can't go anywhere yet.
That's right.
Is that
Yeah.
Yes, I want to hear what you got to say. You remember Miss Utley. Do you remember dancing with her?
Yeah. But this was before I was married.
Yeah.
Where you
So this
dancing,
was,
Shorty?
with these square dances in
Oh, the
private homes is
Yeah.
where I used to go.
And he used to just enjoy doing that in
Yeah.
homes or anywhere.
And we'd go to different homes.
And another thing you might say, Mike, is it was many years before we ever got a bus service over there, and the union got that.
How did they go about that?
I don't know, Rob, do you? They went to the city council or what? Did they go to the city council and get
Rob's
it?
got so much tobacco in his mouth he can't answer you, Esther. You at least could spit your wad into that can. He ain't going to give up on what he's got. He's afraid he'll put the fire out. You ever heard of spit in the fire and call the dogs? That means we'd be ready to move.
Go on and spit so you can tell them. Can't find my pocket.
Here, Robert Allen. Come on, bud. You spit my
Robert Allen, listen to that. Yeah, you can see where all that comes from. That's a family that spoiled their men folks rotten, isn't it?
This
Come on, Robert.
These Parkers
Allen.
really
Your
can
older
go
sister's talking to you.
through a box of candy, can't No, it's mine. I look after my bud, don't I, Bob?
Where else did you go? I know you're a world traveler and you're only half telling it. Did you get around to Chicago or any other
No, I never been to
conferences?
the Windy City.
Where have you been elsewhere to meetings?
I've been to nowhere to meetings. That's the only one that I know.
New York
of.
was the biggest event of your life?
That's right. Farthest from home I ever was. No, we went.
Rob, you got to the American Youth
Nashville.
Congress?
Not
1941?
Tennessee, that's the YWCA group.
You able to talk or is your tobacco going to hold you up? And
What about the bus? Let's get on the bus there.
come on.
How we got the bus?
How'd you get the bus at Highland?
Well, the city had buses running from every other section of town, but none to Highland. And we formed a little committee at the Union Hall, and we went up to see the mayor about it. we wanted to know why we couldn't get bus service. It was about 2.5 miles to town from where we lived. We walked. And he said there was no reason at all why we shouldn't. And we reminded him that we were taxpayers. We paid city taxes. We were citizens of the city of High Point, so we felt like it. And as much as bus service was provided, that we should have one too. We went through the power company too also, so they run the buses at that time. Shortly thereafter, they,
About when was that, Ron?
I wouldn't remember that.
There's one thing.
That was about 40,
But I do remember this. That,
42.
They finally put the bus on over there, and they were very, very pleased with it because it was the most successful bus line.
It was full, wasn't it? I mean, they had more people riding.
right.
Our children had to walk to high school. If they went to school, they had to walk from the high school.
Let me
miles.
ask you, they talk about
4 miles.
the busing now. Actually, my observation on a lot of these communities is instead of school busing being a rural thing, the way it was originally intended to be, it goes to very well-to-do suburban neighborhoods and picks up well-to-do people who could take their kids to school, and that's what it's run for. Because even in those days, that was an isolated village, and yet it never had a school bus route to take your kids to high school. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, well, eventually.
Eventually, but even in those years, it could have been considered
Oh, no.
far enough out.
At that time, they had buses going to the high school, taking kids from other sections of town, but not from where we were.
Right.
And I remember the mayor telling me this. At the committee, as far as he was concerned, there was no fence around the Highland Village. As far as much as part of the city of High Point is Emery Wood, that was the Wintry upper price section. Or north of the track or any other place in town. And he'd see that we got a bus over there, which he did. He was going about sending the bus. And when we first supposed to do power bikes, they were kind of reluctant because they thought that it wouldn't pay. And it wasn't very long afterwards until they realized it was the best paying route they had.
Okay, it seems to me like, Esther, the next thing we got to do is be sure that your celebrity status is... I mean, I didn't know I had a celebrity in the house, and now all of a sudden I do, and we got to be sure that you've never been to see the play. Is that right? There's a play about you, and you've never been to see it.
That's right.
Did anybody call and tell you
No.
that there was an actress playing your part in the
No.
Guilford County Courthouse?
The only thing I know about it, I just heard, were read in the paper where this